All right, the UFC's year is over. No more fights this year. We've got a couple more fights in other promotions and other sports, but the UFC just announced the nominees for the UFC Awards, which is we'll get to in a second. Actually, we'll get to it right now. I don't usually do videos like this. I'm usually just predictions, but thought since the fights are over, I'd have this as a replacement. So I think they started with the best submissions of the year. So I haven't read these. I'm just going to give my candid reaction and then opinion. The first one they put was Merab over O'Malley at UFC 316, the ninja choke from the headlock. And then they had Gene Silva over Bryce Mitchell at UFC 314, which again was a ninja choke. Actually, I think Merab's was an arm and guillotine. What did they say it was? Oh, they didn't even say what kind of submission it was. Cool. A no-arm Bravo. Or a reverse ninja choke is what they call it. Okay. Then they had Kayla Harrison with the Kimura over Juliana Pena at UFC 316, which I forgot happened. And then Fluffy Hernandez against Roman Dolidze with the no legs in rear naked choke. And then, this shouldn't count. They put Walter Walker in for multiple submissions for 3 leg locks against Dante Mays, Kennedy Nzechukwu, and Louis Sutherland, which I think shouldn't count because that's 3 submissions and 4 if you include his one from the previous year. And then in their others receiving votes, they had Sean O'Bannon, which I'm guessing is over Pooja Tamar, Pantoja. I'm not sure who did he fight this year. It wasn't Asakura. Kai Kara France, Armin Surukian, I'm guessing over Dan Hooker, Charles Oliveira over Gamrot, Zalal over Emmett, Brahimaj over, Austin Vanderford, Aaron Blanchfield against Trace Cortez, Nasib Al-Ahmad over Jalen Turner, and Islam Makhachev over Moicano. Okay, they're including a Moicano win. Who do I want to pick? Walter Walker I'm not going to count because, it's not one submission, so it wouldn't really be submission of the year. I like Fluffy Hernandez's submission. It wasn't the most technical, and a lot of that, surprisingly, even though he's grappled, a lot of the events that culminated in that submission were striking events. Harrison over Pena, I'm not picking a fucking win over Juliana Pena. Gene Silva over Bryce Mitchell. That was a good one. The ninja choke really had a big year this year. There's a lot of ninja chokes. And then Merab's over O'Malley. I think the most impressive part about that was the fact that Merab got a finish. I don't know. These are I feel like usually with submission leader, there's a pretty clear, there's a twister or there's Imanari roll or something like that, where it's a submission you only see once every couple years. So it's a pretty clear candidate. I'm trying to think what's the most impressive. Maybe Merab over O'Malley, just because O'Malley hadn't been submitted yet, and throughout his whole career, people were when is someone going to take this striker down and submit him? And no one had done it. So I think, I don't know, a submission over Dolidze is pretty impressive too. But, no, Dolidze's not as good as O'Malley. And I think the fact that it was kind of a unique submission, I'm going to go with Merab's over O'Malley, even though I think that's one of Merab's more overrated performances, which I can say now because he's lost. All right, so next up, we've got a newcomer of the year. They've got Quillan Salkild with the win over Jabli, Yanal Ishmouz, and who else? Oh, yeah, Nasrat Haqparast, the head kick. Atiba Gauthier with his win over Jose Medina, Rob Valentin, and Tristan Vines. Kevin Vallejos with his win over Chikadze, Danny Silva, and Song Woo Choi. David Martinez, he beat Rob Font and someone else, Simon Oliveira. And then Malcolm Wellmaker, who lost this year, which doesn't make a lot of sense. Okay, I'm not that impressed by a lot of these picks. Dave Martinez, Rob Font was a good win. He looked good in that. He also looked good against Simon Oliveira, but Simon Oliveira's shit. Kevin Vallejos, again, I'm not super, he had a pretty close fight with Danny Silva. Song Woo Choi is not a very impressive one. Giga Chikadze is pretty impressive. So a good year for Vallejos. Atiba Gauthier didn't fight anyone good, so I'm not picking him. And then Quillan Salkild. Jabli is kind of a schmuck, but I think Yanal Ishmouz and Nasrat Haqparast are pretty good wins. Maybe if he got in the rankings. Let's see, who else do they have in the honorable mentions? Bia Mesquita had one fight. Jacoby Smith, gassed out after one round against Nico Price and had one other win. I don't even remember who he fought for his first fight. Baisangur Susakayev. Yeah, definitely not picking him. He lost the first round in both of his fights, one against Eric Makoniko, a Cody Brundage victim, and someone else. Islam Dulatov fought a guy I don't remember the name of. Ethan Ewing. How are you going to put Malcolm Elmaker and Ethan Ewing on the same list when Ethan Ewing's only win is Malcolm Elmaker, and Malcolm Elmaker lost to him? Yaroslav Imasov, I mean, that's ridiculous. He had one fight. Mario Pinto, maybe. Was his first fight last year? That's not a bad pick. I don't mind Mario Pinto. Jusang Yu is 1-1 in the year. Tainara is Molly McCann and Loma Lookboom. And then Luke Riley, Bogdangrad, he lost the first round. So not a lot of good picks for debutant of the year. I know, like at the beginning of the year, it started off with a lot of undefeated fighters losing, which probably hurt a couple people's campaigns. But I'm going to go with Quillen Salco, I think. Or do I want to go with Martin? No, Quillen Salco, he got 3-0. He had a big knockout win. He had two big knockout wins, actually. And then looked good against Yanal Shmuz, and that's pretty impressive. So, I'm going to go with him. Knockout of the year. Let's see. First, they got Lerone Murphy versus Aaron Pico. Good knockout. Spinning elbow, which, again, like the Ninja Choke, had a big year. A lot of spinning elbows. This was the year of the spinning elbow, according to many. And especially with that knockout coming after the Carlos Prates one, immediately after, and kind of a comeback. That's a good knockout. Mauricio Huffy versus Bobby Green. Obviously, wheel kick. I feel like with a wheel kick, if you get a clean knockout with a wheel kick, which has only happened like a couple times, like this might be probably the second cleanest after Barboza's. I feel like you're almost guaranteed to get it. Kind of like Buckley when he got his, what they call like the ninja kick. They're kind of hard to beat. Carlos Prates with his spinning elbow against Jeff Neal. Honestly, I was more impressed by his knockout over what do you call it? Leon Edwards. Because Edwards is, I think, defensively better than Jeff Neal. And Jeff Neal kind of likes to get in a scrap. So if he's going to lose, especially against like a hard hitter, that's probably going to be how. So, yeah, I don't know why they picked that one. Ilya Taporia versus Charles Oliveira. It was a good knockout, but Charles Oliveira, obviously, he gets hurt in a lot of his fights. And it was just like a simple boxing combination. It was a 2-3. And rarely to do knockouts like that win awards. I mean, obviously, last year you had Max Holloway, who was, a sloppy, simple boxing combination, obviously, but the circumstances were significantly different, It was the fifth round with, 10 seconds left. They get an exchange. He knocks him out with a second left in a competitive fight. And then they got Quillen Salco with his head kick over Nasser Akparas. That was a good one, head kick. But, I mean, I think it's pretty clear. Oh, the honorable mentions they have Elijah Smith with a slam knockout over, what's his name? I think it's Toshiomi Kazama, something like that. Jusang Yu with a left hook over Jack Sergi. Bo Nickel with a head kick over Rodolfo Vieira. Nazim Sadikov, I'm guessing, with the knockout of Nicolas Mata. And then Kevin Vallejos, I'm guessing. Oh, God, why is that on the list? That was not. I mean, Malikos Alcosta had a better knockout in the fight before. Yeah, I'm gonna go with Mauricio Huffy. A wheel kick is always gonna do good, especially when it's a clean wheel kick, probably the second best one in UFC history. It probably would have been more impressive against a better opponent, but it might be I think it's like a stronger opponent than Nasrat, or about as strong, and it was more impressive than a lot of these. Actually, it was probably the weakest opponent on this of the nominees, but obviously a clean wheel kick knockout, it's going to be hard to beat that. So I'm going to go with Mauricio Huffy for knockout of the year, and then fight of the year. The nominees are Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval. When this happened, a lot of people were like, this is the fight of the year so far. And, the whole debate was like, is someone going to be better than this? Broke a ton of records. Ria Proska versus Khalil Roundtree at UFC 320. Comeback. It wasn't the best fight. Like, the first two rounds were not the most entertaining. They were tense, which, you kind of get in a lot of fights. Like, I'm trying to think of an example. Like Sean Strickland versus Israel Adesanya. If you go back and rewatch that fight, you're like, this is a super boring fight. But in the moment, it's very exciting, which I think definitely is like a factor that improves the quality of a fight. Like I think John Jones versus Alexander Gustafsson. When I go and rewatch that fight, I'm like, this fight wasn't that good. But if you're watching it live at the time, you're like, this is John Jones, who looks unbeatable against a guy who he should beat easily, having a really competitive fight, and it's back and forth, and it's competitive. Which, Yuri Prochazka versus Khalil Roundtree definitely was, especially with a comeback. So I can understand the nomination, but I don't think it was like a incredible fight in the first and second round. Nazim Sadegov versus Nicholas Mata. Now, this is a very rewatchable fight. Even if you know the result, which I think, kind of a lot of people knew the result before the fight happened. I mean, Sadegov is a good prospect. Mata, a little over the hill. Maybe not over the hill, but like we know how good he is, and he's not as good as we know Sadegov is. And they had a really good back and forth. There's a point where Sadakov's against the cage. He's parrying punches and he's slipping his head or whatever. And then a lot of trading in the pocket, which I think is like a traditionally, even like you go back 100 years in boxing, like when you ask someone what a good fight looks like, they're thinking back and forth in the pocket, which you got a lot of in this fight. JDM versus Ballot, again, not the best fight. If you want to talk about the fights I was most excited for as they're happening, JDM over Bilal Muhammad and Yuri Prochazka over Khalil Roundtree are like probably 1 and 2. And I think maybe number 3 is Van and Royval. It just, not a ton happened in that fight. It wasn't very back and forth. I think JDM got off to an early lead. In my opinion, he won maybe every round other than round 2. So he won round 1, and then close round 2, and then the rest of the fight, it wasn't clear that JDM was dominating, but to most people, it's pretty clear that JDM had already won the fight. And I think if it was 2-2 going into the 5th round, we're having a different conversation. I think 2 of the judges actually had it 2-2 going into the 5th round, but as most people had it 3-1 at least for JDM. Him coming back in the 5th round and getting the reversal, and then the big combination, and the takedown, and the takedown gets reversed, and he gets a reversal, and he gets up, and he lands another combination, and then a couple more to end the round. If it were a lot more competitive, that would have been sick, but as someone that had JDM up already, I was like, oh, he didn't get the finish. That was like my reaction to the 5th round. It wasn't like, oh, thank God he won that round. That was super close. He stole that 5th round in the fight. So again, not like a back and forth fight like we saw with Nicholas Mata and Sadegov. And then we've got Ivo Barniewski versus Ivo Aslan, which just happened a couple weeks ago. Which is the pinnacle of what I was talking about, where it's trading in the pocket. I mean, this was 90 seconds long, 2 minutes long, something like that. 89 seconds, not even a minute and a half. And okay, I'm reading this dumb article. It says it felt like there was 2,487 significant strikes landed. I thought that was the real stat for a second with my dumb ass. No, but yeah, back and forth fight. And this also had a lot of that, like in the moment. If you're watching it not knowing the result, it's crazy. From the beginning, Ivo cracks Ivo, or I guess Barniewski cracks Aslan, and then Aslan drops him, and then Barniewski gets up and drops Ivo, and then Ivo gets up and drops Barniewski, and then they separate, and Ivo walks down Barniewski and gets dropped and put out cold. A lot of back and forth, a lot of like not knowing who's going to win at any moment, I think what's even better than not knowing who's going to win at any moment is like, oh my God, this guy's definitely going to lose. Oh my God, he's winning now. He's definitely going to win. Oh, now he might lose. Like Yuri Prochazka versus Glover Teixeira is, I think, my favorite fight of all time, just because in the moment, even if you watch it back, it's still super exciting, a lot of back and forth action. But in the moment, if you're watching it live, there's so many moments you're like, this guy's definitely going to win. Now this guy's definitely going to win. I think that's what makes a great fight. And this is as much of that as you can get in a 90-second fight. Yeah, that's all their nominees. The other others receiving votes: Merab versus Umar. I don't know why that's not on the list over like JD and Bilal. I think that fight wasn't that exciting. I'm kind of a hater of that fight. I think it's pretty overrated, but it was definitely in the top 5 for me. Volkanovski versus Lopez. That's a dumb pick. That wasn't a very good fight. Chris Duncan versus Rebecki. That might be my pick for fight of the year. Jan versus Merab. Good fight. Holloway versus Poirier. Pretty good fight. And then Lopez versus Gene Silva. Also pretty good fight. Of the nominees, like if I just had the ballot with only the nominees on it, I'm probably going to pick Sadegov versus Nicholas Mata. And I didn't really talk about this, but yeah, a lot of people I think are going to pick Joshua Van versus Brandon Royval. But going back and watching that fight, again, it's got the effect of like when you're watching it live and you think that, Van's it's probably 1-1 going to the third, and Van is kind of getting behind in the third round. He cracks him and he wins the round, and the whole crowd goes crazy. That was great. But if you look at kind of what's going on, like technically, it's not a very high level fight. It's not a very like interesting fight. Like a lot of it is Royval repeating the same combinations over and over again to just build volume. So if you look at the stats, you're like, oh my God, it's, it's one of the highest significant strike volume fights of all time, and it was only 3 rounds. But a lot of what Royval was doing was kind of like shit that was landing on the shoulders or shit that Van was rolling with. And it was kind of volume for the sake of volume. And when you look at what Van did, other than the like a lot of people give him credit for making changes throughout the fight because of the side kicks to the knee, which is definitely true. That was a good like adaptation. I think that works there. But other than that, he's doing a lot of the same stuff. Like all of his counters were the same. It was, lean the head back, throw the right hand over the top, or lean the head back, throw a left hook, right hand, or right hook, right hand, left hook, shit like that. Like he didn't mix up a ton. I don't think it was like that. If you're gonna pick a fight for being like a barn fight, like back and forth, technique out the window type of fight, I feel like you got to pick Barniewski versus Aslan. And if you want to pick a fight, especially among these nominees, that's like damage over everything, like back and forth, nonstop. There's also some cool techniques and shit like that. I think you got to pick Sadikov versus Mata. So I'm gonna pick Sadikov versus Mata. I just think it was high level, but also like a good combination of high level and damage happening and back and forth action. With Roundtree versus Prohaska, Roundtree was clearly up 2-0. He was kind of beating up Prohaska. He's landing big strikes, and then Prohaska has like the big moment in round 3 and gets the finish. Whereas Van, it was like a lot of people had it 1-1, some people had it 2-0 Van, and then Van gets a knockdown to like guarantee his win. But it wasn't as exciting as if he was down 2-0 and he had to finish the last minute, like Prohaska. So I think Van versus Royval is a decent combination of all of the fights, but I just think like it's hard to pick it as like the best fight of the year. And honestly, if it were independent of these nominees, I think I'm going Rebecki versus Chris Duncan. Now, that also had a lot of like similar elements to the Van Royval fight, where it's like one guy throwing the same opening over and over again, and the other guy just like not being able to counter off of it super well, but countering off of it well enough that the fight's even. And this fight is kind of like a little bit marred for me by the fact that I feel like Rebecki pretty clearly won it, and he kind of got robbed. But this was super back and forth, a lot of action, a lot of damage, especially a lot of damage, like a lot of facial damage from Rebecki. Chris Duncan is cut open and bleeding everywhere. And again, a lot of like not knowing who's going to win. So I think my fight of the year pick is going to be Chris Duncan versus Mateusz Rebecki. But if I had to vote on this ballot, I'm picking Sadikov versus Nicholas Mata. All right, and then the other category the UFC put out was Event of the Year. And their nominees were UFC 320, UFC 322, UFC 317, and UFC 319. 320 is a little bit ruined for me because I didn't watch it live. I was busy. I watched the co-main, featured fight, and main event. So I watched the 3 best fights probably. But there was a lot of good drama. I'm surprised no fight nights were nominated. I guess they rarely are because the pay-per-view always wins. But yeah, UFC 320, UFC 322. 322, again, just like you might pick it based on everything that happened until the co-main event. But the co-main event and the main event were fucking horrible. They were 2 of the worst fights of the year. And I was very upset by both the results because I hate Shevchenko and I love JDM. And then same thing with UFC 319. It's like it was a decent card, and then we had to watch Khamzat Chimaev lay on DDP for 25 minutes, and I don't even think that card had a WMMA co-main event, but I'm not picking that. And then UFC 317, I think that's gonna be my winner. We had a great knockout. We had a knockout of the year nominee with Topuria Oliveira. We had a fight of the year nominee with Van versus Royval. I'm gonna go pull up Tapology to see what's on the rest of that card. Let's see. That's probably gonna be my pick. I can't remember off the top of my head if there are any like really good fight nights that should have been nominated. Like last year, the last card of the year, UFC Tampa was a really good card, and that arguably was the best card of the year. I guess last year there was also UFC 300, so that was never going to win. But let me see. Oh yeah, Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France, same. That's on the same card. Dariush versus Moicano was a shit fight, but Talbot versus Lima was good. Greg Rodriguez had the knockout over Hermanson. Jose Delgado had the knockout over Hydra Mill. Tracy Cortez versus Viviani Arawada was a shit fight. But McKinney had the quick submission over Borshev. Jacoby Smith had a decent fight with Nico Price. Junard Deniz had a shit fight with Alvin Hines. Yeah, I mean, just based on the main card, I'm probably going to pick UFC 317. The prelims weren't the best. And there was the Dariush Moicano fight on the main card. But Talbot Lima was a good fight. Van Royval was a great fight. Pantoja versus Kai Kara-France was a great performance with a finish. And then Topuria was... Oliveira was a great performance with a finish in a title fight for a double champ. And if you put all those elements together, I feel like that's got to be card of the year. And then also, the UFC didn't put out their fight of the year nominees. I don't know if they normally do. But let me check Tapology's list. Let's see if they got one. Their top fan voted ones. Merab, well, he lost. Joshua Van, that's a decent pick. Islam, yeah, I don't agree. Like, he had that really shitty fight against JDM, and then his other win was Moicano. Ilya only fought once. Yuri, 2 good wins in competitive fights. I don't mind that. Jan had the Marcus McGee fight and then the Merab fight. Marcus McGee performance wasn't the best. I don't think I picked him. Abamavov, Volkanovski, Hamzat. Yeah, okay, these picks aren't the best. I'm not picking Waldo Cortez Acosta. He literally lost. And like JDM also, he lost. These picks are stupid. I think I'll pick Joshua Van. I didn't pick him for fight of the year, so I think I'll pick him for fight of the year. I know he won the belt in shitty circumstances, and that's kind of BS. But before that, he had a fight of the year with Rival. He finished Bruno Silva, and he beat, was that Ray Saruya? Was that his other one? So, yeah, 4-0 on the year. Won a belt in kind of a bullshit way, but had a great fight before that, had a great performance before that, and then another great performance for that. So I'm gonna go with Joshua Van for my fight of the year. Those are my picks. I was gonna do like my own categories, but I couldn't think of anything that was like unique enough that I could rhapsodize about it. I didn't want to pick like some category like best underground prospect of the year or whatever. Like, I don't know. No one cares about that. I think I'm going to do my prospects of the year for 2025 with a couple fighters in and outside of the UFC in a bit. I also kind of want to talk about, I'll probably make this video this week because there's some fights I want to talk about. But yeah, I want to do fights that are going to happen before the UFC starts again because I know a lot of people are looking for shit to watch. And like this weekend, there's Inoue versus Picasso, and then obviously you have Nakatani on the undercard and Tsutsumi. Both of this, actually, I think isn't Seiya Tsutsumi out. I don't know. You have a lot of good fights in that card too. And then, yeah, so I'll do that video in a couple days probably. But yeah, let me know what you thought of my nominations, or my picks rather, not my nominations. They weren't mine. As I was looking through some other fights, I'm like, they probably missed something for a knockout of the year. They really prioritize shit that happens on the pay-per-views, which I get. The crowd definitely helps. But if like all the fight nights were in an arena rather than the Apex, you have you probably get Rivovich versus Hawk Prost as like a nominee for fight of the year, shit like that. So again, like if Chris Duncan versus Mateusz Rebecki happened in front of a crowd, that's like guaranteed fight of the year. But it's kind of screwed over by the fact that it was like in a warehouse with 60 people, and probably only like 100,000 people watched it online. So those are my picks. Let me know if you agree or disagree. Comment down below if you want to, I don't know, tell me about a fight I missed, or if you're interested in fights to watch until the UFC starts again. You can follow me on Twitter. I'll be talking about the boxing. I'll be talking about shit going on in the fight world. I'll also be talking about the maybe actually I'll talk about that in the next video. But yeah, let me know if you agree or disagree. Follow me on Twitter, like the video, share the video, subscribe, all that nonsense. And yeah, thank you for listening.